Howdy, everyone. It's been a few days since I've been out here in the shop working, and I just came out a little bit this morning. I've been out here just for a few minutes, and I thought I'd try to get you caught back up on where I've been and where I'm going. So I've been working on all of the holes on the frame itself. All of the holes have been match drilled, but now it was time to do the countersinking and figure out what to do with all these spacers. So first thing that I needed to do, when I had this frame assembly on the fuselage and I had the skin on, I was fitting all the different spacers in all the areas on this tube that had gaps. And I actually made a couple spacers for this area in here too, because the skin kind of stood up off of this area. While doing that, I was very diligent and made sure that I marked the frame itself and I marked the individual spacers so that I can get the spacers in the exact same spot that they came from. I'm using a variety of different thicknesses, so I wanted to make sure that I knew exactly which holes received which spacers. So everything is labeled so I can put everything back the way that it came. Once that was done and everything was disassembled, I started my hole preparation. Now the holes along the tube, those are 1/8 inch holes, number 30 holes for pop rivets, pulled rivets. Everything else are the standard number 40 holes for the regular squeezed rivets. So just be mindful of that there are two different size holes that you need to be aware of. Make sure you get them in the right spot. Don't start drilling 30s on your tube and then running them through here and across here, because they'll be too big. The larger 30 size holes are only on the tube. Everything else is number 40. And as I said, I've got everything marked, so I know that I can get the spacers back in place where they came from. The spacers themselves, like I said, I used a variety of different thicknesses. This is actually a piece of angle. This is like 1/8 inch thick piece of aluminum angle that I had cut the legs in half, and then I cut each leg a little bit smaller. So these are roughly half inch wide pieces of 1/8 inch aluminum, and then I bent them by hand around the perimeter of a 25-pound plate that I have, part of my free weights. That actually ended up being just about the perfect overall diameter for the bend. So I just bent these around that and then, tweaked them if I had to get them to fit nice on the tube like this. So these heavy spacers, of course, are for the problem area in this bend here. That's where I had, and most people have, the most problems with space between the frame and the skin. So these just go in between like this. And of course, I added the lightning holes just because. I did the lightning holes freehand, so they're not perfect. I didn't bother drawing reference lines and all that. I just did them by hand. And then, of course, I've got thinner spacers. These are all like 25 thou, 32 thou, whatever they are, spacers. This one's a little bit heavier. This, again, is another 1/8 inch. And the same thing over here. I've got the same type of 1/8 inch cut down, bent angle that will reside in this corner. And then I've got some other thinner spacers here. So now, here's the thing. You have to also keep in mind which spacers are going to be up against the outer skin. So this particular spacer is going to go here. Let me do the other side. So this particular spacer is going to go here on the corner. And one of these, I don't know which one off the top of my head, but one of these will also get this 1/8 inch spacer. This 1/8 inch spacer will actually get stacked on top of this spacer, like that. I don't know if that's the right location, but that's the idea. So when I'm working on this corner, after I get all the holes drilled, I have to make sure I get this spacer in the right location. And I have to get this spacer in the right location on top of this spacer, because this spacer here is what's going to be up against the skin. So this gets machine countersunk. Since this is machine countersunk, it's flat on the bottom. So its location on top of this spacer does not have to be countersunk or anything else. That location on the tube also does not need to be countersunk or anything else. So when you go through your spacers, you have to figure out which ones are going to be machine countersunk, which ones are going to have additional spacers stacked up on top of them, and which ones are thin enough that you can dimple. Of course, the thin ones that you dimple, the frame has to be machine countersunk. So again, you have to be mindful of all of that. So I was very careful. Like I said, I had everything labeled, and you can see I've got a machine countersunk hole here. These are not machine countersunk at all. And then I've got a machine countersunk hole here. So these will ultimately either get machine... Yeah, I can't dimple this. This is too fat. Ultimately, these will get machine countersunk for the actual skin. But I know that there's a spacer that goes here, and there's probably a spacer that goes here. Or I'm sorry. The spacer goes in between. I just haven't machine countersunk this yet. This location just gets the skin. This location just gets the skin. So I machine countersunk those to accept the skin. These are going to have to get machine countersunk deep enough for the spacer that goes here that is dimpled. So just to recap, again, depending on how you do your spacers, of course, like I always say, there are plenty of ways to skin a cat, right? This is just how I decided to do mine. Had all the holes drilled, had all the spacers in place real time on the airplane with the skin, marked all the spacers and all the individual holes so I can get everything put back together again. And then depending on what the spacer was as far as thickness, where it was located on the frame, and what, if anything, may have been stacked on top of it, that dictated if it was machine countersunk, dimpled, if this needed to be machine countersunk or dimpled, things of that nature. So that's what I've been working on. So as of right now, I've got a few more holes that I need to machine countersink and clean up a couple of the edges. And this frame, I believe, will be done. I've got all the spacers done. So next up will be to figure out what to do with the skin. It still needs to be prepped. I just have it laying on top of the fuselage here. All these holes still need to be prepped. You can see I've got a note here. I'm going to put a little bit more of a bend on this edge, just right here in this corner, try to get it to lay down better. All these holes need to be prepped, and then I have to deal with this ear. Now, I know a lot of people cut these ears off. I think they cut them across this way. I'm going to do something totally different. I'm just going to continue this cut right here all the way down and remove this entire ear, I believe. And then after I get this skin prepped, if I'm comfortable, I'll have to look ahead and make sure I'm not going to hooch myself. But if I'm comfortable, I'm going to go ahead and rivet the skin onto the frame before I start fitting anything else. But I'll get to that later. All right. So like I said, now all I'm going to do is finish up cleaning the frame, and then I'm going to move on to the skin and get that cleaned up and ready to roll, and then possibly start riveting. But we'll see. I got to make sure I don't hooch myself by riveting something I shouldn't. All right. All right. Thanks for hanging in there. I will talk to you guys later. Howdy, everyone. You can see I have the skin now cleaned, edged, prepped, and the holes deburred, and everything is now dimpled. So the skin is ready to be installed. You can see on this back edge here, I had cut off the ears, like I said that I probably would end up doing. I just followed this edge here right on across, and I cut both of them off. Like I said, obviously everything is been cleaned up and dimpled. The frame is the same. I now have the frame cleaned up, edge finished, everything countersunk that needs to be countersunk. And like I've talked about, some of the holes do not get countersunk because I've got spacers in here. The spacer gets countersunk for the skin, so the frame does not need to be countersunk in certain areas. Wherever there are spacers involved, I don't need to countersink. So that is now all complete, and there is one thing that I wanted to point out that I have added to the frame. When the canopy is complete, somewhere, I'm not exactly sure exactly where, but somewhere in here there's a gas strut that gets attached to the fuselage and it gets attached to the frame. So on the inside of the frame, underneath here, somewhere in here, a gas strut gets mounted. And that just holds open the canopy when you open it. Of course, when you close it, you have a lot of that stress is built up in that strut. And since one end is anchored to the fuselage, the other end is pushing forward on the frame itself. And don't remember where, but I've heard and seen where people have had issues with the frame flexing because that gas strut is pushing on it when it's closed. It's pushing it forward. So what I've seen other people do, and I've copied, is to just install a simple nut plate, as you see here on the frame. The screw goes through an existing tooling hole on the frame. So that's all I used. I just used that tooling hole as a reference and then added the nut plate. And then onto that you screw whatever you want, a screw, a bolt, whatever, long enough so that when the canopy is closed, this will butt up against your sub panel in this area. And this is a very strong corner. You've got a lot of support in here. So this is very, very robust. So the head of the bolt just rests against the substructure, which will prevent the frame from distorting and possibly being pushed forward by that gas strut. And of course, that's fully adjustable. I don't have it adjusted right now, obviously, because I don't have anything else assembled. But that was a slight modification that I added to the frame. Other than that, this is ready to go. I'm going to do a little bit of riveting. I'm going to start riveting the skin to the frame, but I'm not going to rivet all of it quite yet because I want to make sure I can get to these rivets here when I add the rest of the frame. But I want to get as much done to the skin frame itself before I start anything else, just because, again, I want to start trying to lock this down and prevent it from moving. In the beginning, when we started, having a lot of movement and a lot of adjustment was what we wanted, but now that we're getting things dialed in, we want to start locking it down so that it can't move. So I'm going to start adding some rivets, put the skin on and add some rivets, and then we'll start working on this framing. All right, talk to you here shortly. Howdy, everyone. Well, I believe it is time to rivet the canopy skin to the frame. I've already riveted the frame side rails to the front canopy frame with the, what do I want to call it? This joining angle. I can't think of what they call that. A joint plate, I guess. So obviously this is riveted in place, and you can see here I've got the wedge in place. Everything is riveted. Both sides, of course. That's ready to roll. Nothing has been done to this tab here that's talked about in the instructions. This does not get drilled or riveted quite yet. Now that I've got the frame riveted to the main frame, riveted to the side rails, I believe I can go ahead and rivet the skin. At least that's what I'm going to do. I don't know if you're supposed to now or not, but it makes sense to me because, like I said, I've made a lot of adjustments to this whole thing. I've had it on and off the fuselage 200 times. And I want to start locking things down so when I start working with this back area, I don't need to worry about stuff up here shifting. So I believe I'm ready to roll on the riveting of the skin. I've got all my spacers in up underneath like I've talked about before. And I like what I see. I had this frame, just the front frame with the skin and the spacers clecoed in place on the fuselage, and it fit really nice. I was happy with that. I put a little bit more of a bend on this forward edge, a little bit more of a downward break just in the corners, if that seemed to help. And with the spacers in place, you can see now that the clecos are not pulling down on the skin as much as they will if you don't take any actions to prevent it. By that I mean I put a lot of bend in the skin, especially this bottom edge, just by hand, just kind of roll it a little bit on the edge. Of course, the spacers make a big difference because you cleco up against the spacer. You're not trying to close that gap with the force of a cleco. If you do that, you'll see it in the skin, especially now since it's shiny. You'll see where the cleco is clamping down, and you'll have like a dent around the cleco. You'll see like an indentation around the cleco where it's pulling the skin down, and you should probably have a spacer in there. It's not perfect, but you can see that the skin does lay quite nice, even though it's super shiny and there are a lot of reflections. You can see that the clecos are not pulling down those dents. I got a little bit of a dent in this cleco, but there's nothing I'm going to do about it just because of where that is in the skin. There's not much you can do as far as spacers in that particular location. Anyway, I'm happy with how this is coming out, so I'm going to go ahead and rivet. I don't think there are any rivets, I'm not sure, but I don't believe there are any that I can do with the squeezer. I think all of these are going to have to be done with the rivet gun and a bucking bar. So I believe that's what I'm going to do next. So let me get this thing riveted in, and then we'll probably fit it once again to the fuselage just to be sure that it's close. And then at that point, I think I'll flip it upside down and I'll do the reinforcing aluminum pieces that go up underneath this with the lightning holes in them. They go up underneath here. I think I'll do those next after I get it riveted. So I'll do that, and we'll see what comes next.